everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to give a few seconds here for audio to connect before we get going. Looks like we're doing great. So thank you for joining us tonight for a very special virtual event with Guy Raz. A few quick Zoom housekeeping details before we get started. You are muted. You will remain muted throughout the duration of the event. For optimal viewing, please use your Zoom view function. Select speaker view so that our author is highlighted on your screen. And please ask questions using the chat box function. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. We're behind the scenes monitoring, so go ahead and type in questions to the chat box. If at any time you drop off the Zoom or experience technical difficulties, simply click the link again to be readmitted. And if you haven't already, please do not forget to purchase a copy of How I Built This at rjjulia.com, wesleyanrjjulia.com, or bookhampton.com. You can click on the link in your chat box for quick and easy purchase, or you can visit us in store. We're open for shopping in both locations in Connecticut, in Madison or Middletown, and in East Hampton at BookHampton. On behalf of RJ Julia, Wesleyan RJ Julia, and BookHampton, and along with the Just the Right Book podcast, thank you for joining us tonight. I'll pass it off to owner of RJ Julia and host of Just the Right Book podcast, Roxanne Coady, to introduce tonight's featured guest. Please give a warm digital virtual welcome to Roxanne Coady and Guy Raz.
Thanks, Erica. Welcome to everybody. In the relatively young world of podcasts, Guy Raz is, as the New York Times called him, king. He is one of the most popular podcasters in history. His combined monthly audiences is 19.2 million downloads, not 19. He is or was the host and is the co-creator and editorial director of the TED Radio Hour, How I Built This, and Wow in the World. And now he is the author of the book, How I Built This, The Unexpected Path to Success from the World's Most Inspiring Entrepreneurs. In his podcast and now in his book, what seems like stories about business are really stories about being human. Guy is our stand-in, our archaeologist, and our guide. Guy, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Roxanne. Great to be here.
So in my intro, I left out a couple of little key elements of your resume, like you're a war reporter, you've been the NPR bureau chief in Berlin and London, you covered conflicts in Iraq, Kosovo, Palestine, Afghanistan. You won the Edward R. Murrow Award. So what was your process or motivation of leaving such prominent, important, stable positions to jump into the nascent world of podcasts, first with TED Radio Hour and then starting How I Built This? Was it drip, drip? Did you have an aha moment? How did that happen?
It happened because of one very specific thing, Roxanne, and that was failure. It happened because of failure. 10 years ago, I was living in a different world. I mean, I was a reporter. I was a host of All Things Considered. And I had all these ambitions to be, to be what I thought was to have a prestigious role as a news anchor at NPR. And what happened was I wasn't selected. I wasn't chosen to be the main anchor on All Things Considered 10 years ago, and that really was a roadblock. And it it wasn't that I wasn't chosen and the people who made that decision were evil. It was that they had other plans. And so
still alive.
Yeah. So and the message that I got then was, look, this is as far as you are going to go. You know, and part of it was I had been the host of the weekend version of All Things Considered, and I was really that really was where I kind of supercharged my own entrepreneurial journey. You know, I was not yet a full entrepreneur, but I was functioning in that way, and I used that show as a sandbox to really try and recreate it. And I think I gained a reputation certainly among news managers as somebody who charted their own course. I'm being charitable, but probably from their perspective, somebody who wouldn't listen to them. And in an organization like NPR or any other media organization, you know, managers and producers and they want to have control. And my view was always that my voice, the voice you hear, it's not good enough to just read a script and to follow somebody else's vision.
Yeah.
If that were the case, I'd have the voice of Bob Edwards, who had the most beautiful voice. You remember Bob Edwards.
Yeah.
I was not born with a great voice. What I brought to the air, what I brought to NPR News were my ideas. And that was my argument. So I never sort of functioned well in an environment where you sort of, there was this hierarchical structure and the show head made the decisions and the hosts kind of went along with it. And so for a variety of reasons, I wasn't gonna be in the cards for me. That was about 10 years ago. And I had to make a decision. I had to decide what I was going to do with my life, because at that point I was 35. And I was still in a position where I could start over. I'd already been at NPR for 12, 13 years by that point. But I had an opportunity to collaborate with TED, the people who do TED Talks, to start a show, a podcast. And at the time, nobody was doing podcasts were like, it was like going into exile. And when I left NPR News 10 years ago to go start a podcast, some of my colleagues at NPR, distinguished colleagues, were like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Who listens to podcasts? Who listens to these
What
things?
are you thinking?
What are you thinking? You're the weekend host of All Things Considered. What are you thinking? And I thought the same thing. I was pretty scared too at the time, because I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. But you know what? I had two little kids, and I didn't care. I was just done with being part of the news. I was done with that part of my life. I had been in the news world for 15 years at that point, and I was really interested in creating something totally new and different. And I didn't care if nobody's going to listen to it. So the TED Radio Hour was a chance for me to completely reinvent who I am and what I do again. And with that show, I decided I wanted it to be about what it means to be human. And that was really the core and the crux of that show. And we launched it. I launched it, I started working on it in 2012. And it, was a slow burn, but podcasting took off. And I found myself in a position a few years in where I was the guy doing it. I was there. I was one of these people doing it. And we had a big audience, and I never expected it. I mean, I thought it was going to be a year or two and I'd go find a job somewhere, I don't know, teaching or consulting or something. I didn't know. But that was really the sort of the core, the crux and how I kind of jumped from a completely different world that I inhabited to this one that I live in now, where I make podcasts. I have a production company. I do another production company where I do kids content, and it's just kind of crazy how things work out that way.
So in many ways, this leads to a series of questions, because you're not only the host of How I Built This, but you built this. You built How I Built This. And it prompts two questions I would have for you, Guy. One is, in reading about your background, your dad left a perfectly good, legit job at 41 to start a jewelry business, I think selling pearls. And so was that a motivator to you to become an entrepreneur, or was that a deterrent?
It was a deterrent because I watched, when I was a kid, I watched my dad really struggle to get his business off the ground at the beginning. I mean, I watched my mom and my dad cold call people, knock on doors. And then there were some, and then, you know, they eventually created a sustainable business, but there were some years where the economy was bad and people didn't buy pearls, and my dad was stressed, and, you know, he had employees. And so I didn't really want that life. I wanted a sort of a stable life. I wanted to go work for somebody else and not worry about those kinds of things. Here's what I realized, really, and it probably took me about 15 years to realize this, which is that I didn't become an entrepreneur, and it wasn't that I had been exposed to it early on. I mean, I was a kind of kid that had lemonade stands, and I did all kinds of garage sales and sold candy at schools, and I always had jobs. When I was 12 and 13, I started working in a gas station, in the shopping malls. I always loved earning money for myself.
You were wired for this.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think a lot of kids are like that. I think that what I realized throughout my over the course of reflecting on my career was that I was entrepreneurial. And actually, I bet most of you watching this right now are entrepreneurial and behave and act in an entrepreneurial way every single day. It really is a mindset. You know, we fetishize this word entrepreneur. This person's an entrepreneur. No, it's a way of behaving and acting. It's solving problems. It's confronting an obstacle and trying to figure out how to get around it. It's it's making all sorts of decisions. It's dealing with crisis. It's being resilient when things are challenging and hard. And so over the course of my career, I came to recognize that I operated in that way. And also throughout my career, I was always trying to create new ideas and new things. I mean, whether I was a reporter overseas, or you know, and the way I tried to report, to when I became the host of All Things Considered, to, you know, and creating all these new initiatives, and then creating shows. I love creating. I think a lot of people can identify with that. So, initially I was deterred from this idea of being an entrepreneur because it was scary to me. But over time, I realized that actually most of us operate that way. And once you can recognize that and realize it and think of yourself that way, then it became clear to me that that's really what I wanted to do and to be.
Yeah. So so you're at NPR, it sounds like developing a little bit of a understanding, whether appropriately or not, that maybe you were not meant for what you had imagined. So, in your interviews and in your stories about entrepreneurs, there are moments of feeling very alone, down, and losing confidence. Was that a moment for you, or did that just become a motivator for you to think in a different way, and you didn't have to overcome a kind of disappointment in yourself?
No, I mean, I have been to the depths and the bottom of the barrel. I mean, I have had so many moments in my career where I thought I was kind of finished, and so many obstacles in front of me. I mean, when I came back, look, I went overseas to be a foreign correspondent when I was 25. I had a very early meteoric rise, which I now on reflection realize it doesn't mean anything, right? But at the time, it was exciting. I was on this fast track. I covered the Iraq War, and then I was recruited by CNN to be their Jerusalem correspondent to cover Israel-Palestine, right? I was on television for 2 years, and it was very interesting, but it wasn't for me. Now imagine I go back to the United States, and I managed to get back into NPR. And imagine I'm back at NPR. I had been a foreign correspondent. I'd covered 4 wars. I'd been to 30 countries at that point. I'd been CNN's correspondent, and I got back, and the foreign editor at NPR at the time, there was a right when I came back, there was a new conflict between Israel and Lebanon, and I had just returned right before that, and I was ready to go back and help NPR out. And the foreign editors had me write copy for the web.
Whoa.
And that was a hard moment for me, a very humbling moment, because I had come back. I was, a CNN correspondent, and here I am writing web copy. And it was a really difficult moment because it made me realize that I had to start from scratch. And that was a very important experience for me. And I did. I mean, I had to fight my way back in to find a job, and eventually got one covering the Pentagon. And after doing that for a few years, I really wanted to be the host of a show. But I wasn't able to, because at the time there were executives who made decisions about who was allowed to be a host of a show. And it was determined that I didn't fit the personality mold. I didn't have the right personality. In fact, what I was told was that I sounded too much like a military correspondent and a war reporter, and that I was too serious, and I didn't have what a traditional NPR host had or needed to have to be a host. So those were some of the moments that really kind of put me in a spiral, because when somebody you admire and respect tells you suck, you believe them. And I believe that. And so there were many times in my career where I began to look outside of it, to say, yeah, I wanted to be a journalist, I want to be a reporter, but maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe these people are right. But each time that happened, what I realized in hindsight was it was a kick in the butt. It forced me to try and take control over my career and stop handing it over to people to make those decisions for me, whether it was news executives or managers or whatever, but to actually say, you know what, I'm going to try and decide what I'm going to do with my career. And so when that happened, when I couldn't be the host of a show, I began to explore other possibilities, and I ended up finding this amazing opportunity to study at Harvard for a year as a journalism fellow, a program that they had there called the Nieman Fellowship. I applied for it and I got it, but I really applied for it because I thought that was my way out. That was my transition year out of journalism. But that actually was my year where I recharged and was kind of reborn as a journalist, and then was really able to get to the next level.
And just so that we put a period on that part of it, it was, you took a class while you were a Nieman Fellow, and the renowned case study approach that they use really ended up becoming, share with us how that became sort of the pivot to how I built this.
Yeah, it was 2008, so it was a long time ago. But I took a class for the first time in my life at a business class at a business school. And I was just astonished that the way students learned about business through the case study method. I thought it was so fascinating because case studies are essentially stories. And it became so clear to me that what I loved to do as a reporter, whether it was covering Iraq or Afghanistan or Israel, Palestine, wasn't the day-to-day bang, bang news cycle. I was never interested in that. I saw a lot of gunfire. I was around a lot of bombs and explosions. That was not what I lived for. There are some reporters who live for that. That was not me. I'm not a cowboy. I lived for the stories of people who lived in those places. That's what I wanted to do. And that's what I was good at. I was not a good beat reporter, and I was not a good investigative reporter. I was a really good storyteller. And when I saw that was how they were teaching business school, it became very clear to me that they do that because we learn from narrative. We don't learn as well when we are exposed to abstract ideas. We learn from stories of other people. That's what we retain. And so once I started to really get into this class and these case studies, it really planted the seed in my mind that I could do this in the format that I already am doing it in, which is audio. That maybe there's something there. So I kind of planted it in the back of my head, and it sort of stayed there, for another, I guess, 7 years. before I came back to it.
You know, Guy, in your telling the story and in reading the book or listening to your show, you're bringing up something that I think is very tricky for people over the arc of their career. And that is when they're in a inflection point or a failure or a disappointment, there's a lot of voices, right? There's your parents, your spouse, your friends, your mentors. And often people are discouraging of people making change. They just generally are, you know, I don't know, I don't think they mean badly, but they do. So as you've spoken to these entrepreneurs, or you think about your own experience, what is it that helps you choose the right people to listen to that jive with what's going on in the interior of your brain? How do you even begin to think about that?
You know, it's very hard, right? Because you are going to be exposed to all kinds of advice and all kinds of people telling you what to do. In my experience, I have found that it becomes intuitive. There comes a point where you just kind of know that you have to do something. I mean, look, one of the examples I talk about in the book, which I think is so relevant to so many of us, is this concept of being scared of doing something, or of doing something that's dangerous, or doing something that's scary.
Right.
So for example, let's say you've got a job right now that is stable, that pays you well, that you get decent benefits, but you don't love it. It's not the thing that really gets you out of bed in the morning. And you have some idea in your mind of something you want to do with your life. And you always have. Maybe it's an Etsy shop. Maybe it's, I don't know, something that you want to create, right? Some idea you have. But you're too scared to leave that job because it's stable. Well, the question is, what's the bigger challenge here? Being scared to leave the job, or to stay in the job and risk never trying this thing that you wanted to do? And the argument there is that is actually the more dangerous decision, because if you find yourself one day unable to try this thing that you want to try again, well, you're sort of out of options. It's scary to try something new. It's scary to leave a stable job. It's scary to take risks. But the question is it dangerous not to? And so that, I think, is something that I have reflected on a lot, and something I talk about in the book, and a way to kind of think about how to take risks, right? And when I say risks, by the way, it doesn't mean jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. It doesn't mean quitting that job and going to start your Etsy business selling, woven baskets. What it means is that you mitigate the risk. You start by being smart. You start by researching an industry or a product. The example I use in the book is Jim Koch, the founder of Boston Beer Company. He was a consultant at Boston Consulting Group.
Big job.
Big job. He had 2 kids. He was a Harvard graduate. He had a mortgage, married. Age 30, in his late 30s, he's thinking, I'm miserable. And he's on the fast track to partnership. He's going to have those golden handcuffs. He's going to be a rich guy. But he's miserable. And so he decides he wants to start a beer company. Okay, in 1983. This is when American beer was a joke. It was the worst product on the planet. Nobody drank American beer. But he wanted to revive the culture of American beer making. Now, he didn't leave Boston Consulting Group, but he started to sketch out his idea on nights and on weekends. And then he started to actually do real research by visiting bottling plants, talking to anybody he could about the process, about the beer making process. He would go to to bars and see how people were drinking. He was basically acting as his own consultant, right? Doing his own case study and also saving his money. And when the time was right, it was 6 or 7 months down the road, he already had dipped a toe into the water. He felt comfortable to jump into that pond with 2 feet and really pursue this idea. But I will add that he knew that if for some reason it failed, it didn't work out, he didn't burn his bridges at Boston Consulting Group. He left on good terms. And so, you know, he left the door open to go back or maybe to go to another consulting job. So, and by the way, this is a theme that I've encountered over and over again with entrepreneurs. You know, we think of them as these brash risk takers. It's just not true. Most of them mitigate their risks. Most of them have spent a lot of time thinking about how to methodically approach the problem that they're trying to solve with a product or an idea. And I think that's really instructive because sometimes many of us are intimidated, and I talk about this in the book. So many of us are intimidated to try something new or to introduce a new idea into the world because of the risk involved. But the reality is that you can mitigate risk. And then you have to ask yourself, is it dangerous or is it merely scary? Dangerous things don't do. Scary things we can all do.
Yeah, and you know, Guy, I love that message. And Jim's story prompts me to ask a slightly different question that has sort of a negative element to it, but a positive element as well. So Jim had a big safety net. He had a Harvard background. He had been at Bain. Likely if Bain wouldn't take him back, or BCG, Bain would take him. Somebody would take him, right? He was still Harvard. He still had that experience. In addition, he was the 3rd generation brewer,
yes,
right? There were brewers in his family. So one of the criticisms of people who want to have startups is, well, they don't have access to family and friend money. They don't have the, you know, as the word is often used now, the privilege to be able to do this. But you talk about the other advantages that people underestimate are an element of privilege. And I'd love to have you talk about it. You know, you talk about personality, will, resilience, likability. So share with us the other qualities, if you're not one of the people coming from privilege, that could lead to your success.
And let me preface this by saying, look, we have a fundamental problem with systemic racism in the United States. And there's no question that white-skinned men are 100 meters ahead from the starting line. Okay, they're starting 100 meters ahead. So if you're a white man like me and you're a real success, woohoo, congratulations, okay?
Good job.
Good job, right? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so cynical, but really, it's not easy, but it's easier.
No.
But here's the other side to it. I think it's not entirely constructive only to talk about the idea that some people can succeed and many people can't. Because while I believe it's true that there are some people who have unearned privileges and advantages, I really do believe that there are other advantages that people who may not have those financial or network advantages bring to the table. Personality, the ability to connect with people, the ability to convince people of what you believe in your idea. I mean, one example I can give you is of Tope Awotona. He came to the United States at the age of 15 with his mother. His father was murdered when he was a child. He grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. He was brought to the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, and sent to a high school, an American high school, which he had never experienced in his life, racially segregated. He never experienced any of this in Lagos. He goes to the University of Georgia to study computer science, okay? While he's at the University of Georgia, and by the way, has no money, okay? He gets a job selling ADT alarm systems door to door. So he begins a 2-year career as an undergraduate at the University of Georgia, going door to door in Athens, Georgia, trying to sell people alarm systems. Okay, he knocks on 500 doors a week, and 490 of those doors get slammed in his face. But through that time, he learns that if he can get one sale out of the 500, it's more money than he's ever seen in his life. And he realizes that eventually there's a hit rate, that you have to experience a lot of no's and a lot of rejection until you hear a yes. So over that course of those 2 years selling ADT monitors, he builds a resilience to rejection. It's like rejection exposure therapy. It's like getting inoculated 1,000 times so that when he hears no later on, he's like, I've heard that before. He then graduates, he becomes a sales rep for a travel agency and then for a series of software companies, where again, he learns how to play the game. He learns how to hear no and how to keep coming back, and becomes a very successful sales rep and saves all of his money because he really wants to start a business one day. And he goes through 3 phases of 3 different businesses. He starts a projector company. He then starts a barbecue company selling barbecues. Those both fail, and he actually lost a lot of his own cash because he saved, over the course of 9-10 years, he saved a lot of money. He finally lands on an idea in his mind to create an online scheduling platform that would make it easier for people to schedule meetings with each other rather than go back and forth and back and forth. But he's not a developer. He has no connections to developers. What does he have? He has his 401k. He cashes it out. He pays the 10% penalty, and he takes the $100,000 he has saved, okay, over that time period, and he finds a computer program factory, basically, in Ukraine. He tells him his vision, and they build it for him. That product is Calendly today. It is an $80 million company. He owns nearly 100% of it because he could not raise a penny for it. Right. He was a black man in Atlanta, Georgia, trying to convince people to believe in him, and he couldn't find any investors except one who gave him a tiny amount of money. The sheer force of will and also his experience as a salesman gave him the tools to create this business. Now, I'm not saying anybody can do that easily.
No.
What I'm saying is it's important to talk about these stories. And one of the reasons why I'm so focused in the book and on the show in talking about women and entrepreneurs of color isn't to be politically correct. That's not why I do it. I do it because I want women and people of color listening to the show to hear themselves in those stories and to say, oh my God, I can do that too. And we do hear that. When we have an episode like we just did, last week about a black entrepreneur, we hear from black entrepreneurs who say, I saw myself in that person and I think I could do that too. That's what fires me up. I have a huge platform. I reach 3.5 million people a week on how I built this. If I can inspire, more entrepreneurs to come online, more people to think entrepreneurially, that's incredible. Like, there's no other job I'd want in the world.
And I get that. What I wondered about when I think about all the buzz around startups and shows like How I Built This, it makes me wonder, is that motivating people who can't do the lift to do it? Or is it prompting soul searching to really determine if they want to be entrepreneurial, but within an institutional environment rather than, fly the airplane while they're building it?
Yeah. Look, we are living in a very difficult time in human history and an even more difficult time in American history. Okay. I think I can look at all of you and I think you probably nod your heads and agree. There are many reasons to be pessimistic right now. There are many reasons to feel despair. What I'm trying to do with my show is to inspire people to think differently. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be optimistic all the time and walk out the door and, dance and
Whistle a
sing.
happy tune.
Right. What I'm trying to do is to say to everyone who listens, there is a world of possibility. And you don't have to build the next Airbnb or Uber or Lyft to be a successful entrepreneur. In fact, to the contrary, you don't even have to build a business to be a successful entrepreneur. All you need to do is to have confidence in your own ability to introduce an idea into the world. And it might be something as simple as a different way of operating. And Roxanne, it might be one of your employees saying, hey, Roxanne, we really should have a whole section here on death metal. And it should be painted in black. And I want to run that section. And I think everybody working that section should wear spiked collars.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, that's a stupid idea. But I want that person to have the confidence to really think about that idea and to imagine a world where maybe that will improve someone's life. Maybe somebody will walk in your bookstore and say, oh my God, you're speaking to me.
Got this. Right. I thought about that before I had bookstores. I was a partner in a large accounting firm. And I remember really having to stop myself. I'd been 20 years doing it. I thought, and you'd get this young whippersnapper in there and they'd say, Rox, what about this? And I'd have to take, 15 seconds when I'd want to say, that is the stupidest thing I ever heard. And instead pivot into, tell me what made you think of it and tell me how you think that would, because it's tempting, right? You're sort of cynical at that point. You're like, oh, please just go away. And we need to remember the next brilliant idea for your business is in potentially that person.
That's right. And that person might say, hey, let's do this death metal section. Everybody wears black spiked collars. And you'll say, it seems a little odd. Could we branch it out? And they'll say, well, they also really like gaming. Okay, well, tell me more. And then next thing you know, you've got a whole tribe of people coming to your store because of this wacky idea. And this happens again and again in businesses. It happens in organizations and it happens to individuals. And that's really the core and the crux of what I'm trying to do on the show through the stories and the narratives of the people and in the book. It's not just here is how to architect a business. I mean, the book does that, right?
It does do that.
It does that. Here's how to start a business from soup to nuts. And here's all the things that you may want to think about. And here are but it's also narrative driven. It's every chapter. You don't have to read in order. Every story every chapter is its own series of stories. It's designed to also ignite and fire up ideas in your own mind. And they don't have to be business ideas, but really just ideas that get your creativity going, and really kind of, maybe prompt you to follow your curiosity. That's what I'm trying to do with the book, even though I package it in this careful wrapper of business.
Yeah.
Certainly helpful for people who are interested in business. I really am trying to be a source for inspiring people to think about disruptive ideas. And again, it doesn't have to be the next rocket to the moon. A disruptive idea can be a different way of working within your organization or your institution or your club. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do.
And some of it is, and you talk about this in the book, is kind of accidental. I forget the name of the woman in Boston who had a food truck, and in order to keep people happy in line, she took sort of the pita bread and toasted it and handed it out. But
I think people here will know who I'm talking about. Stacy Madison and Stacy's Pita Chips.
It's like, okay, the side gig became the gig.
Right? I mean, that's right. I mean, she had a pita sandwich roll-up cart in downtown Crossing, and to keep people waiting in line, they would hand out pita chips because they had stacks of pita at the end of the day, and they would just toast them and sprinkle Parmesan on it. Well, people started coming to the sandwich cart and asking for the pita chips, which she was giving out for free. Well, that eventually became a business that they sold to Pepsi for $250 million 10 years later.
Yeah. And the other part, but before I ask my closing couple of questions, that we'd be remiss not to talk about that because we haven't gotten to that in the conversation, because people can read the book and learn that. But you do really address the issues of how do you bootstrap a company? How do you remain iterative? How do you think about financing your business with outside money or not? How do you create buzz? I mean, all of that is in the book. And if we had another hour, we would get to that. But I want to wrap up the conversation with this element. You close many of your interviews and ask your guests to what extent do they feel luck played a part in their success compared as opposed to hard work or skill or intelligence. What is it about that question that you think reveals something about the person that might not have otherwise gotten revealed?
You know, it's a question that is, even though it sounds like a either or answer, it's not designed to elicit a binary. It's not a binary question. It's not this or that or this or that. I ask that question at the end of often a 3 to 4 hour interview. What you hear on the show and what you read in the book are just a small portion of that interview that is not aired. Very few of us spend 3 or 4 hours recounting our life story in granular detail. You know, Socrates talked about the examined and unexamined life. Very few of us examine our lives in such detail. I've just walked a person through their entire journey in granular detail. And now, and by the way, they all know this question is coming. And many of them have an answer prepared for that question. And without fail, they always go off script, because after 3 hours, when you ask somebody, what do you attribute your luck, your success to? Hard work and skill, intelligence, luck, what is it? By the way, I'm not just asking them to give me an answer like based on, you know,
A, B, or C.
Yeah. I mean, embedded in that question is it privilege? Is it advantages you had? I mean, it's all embedded in that question. And I'm not asking it to be judgmental. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really designed to say, okay, we've just had this conversation. Now, I want you to reflect on what we talked about. So what do you think it is? Why do you think it's like that? It's a little bit like when you leave a museum and you walk into the atrium. And usually atriums are these soaring, beautiful places for meditation and reflection. And they're designed that way for a very specific reason. They're designed in this soaring way to give you headspace to think about what you just encountered. That's the role that question plays. It's basically saying, what do you think? Tell me. Oh, and very often the answers to that question are they're quite revealing, because it's a moment that really enables that person to be very generous with their story, and to really think about why they succeeded. So as I say, there's no right or wrong answer, but it really is just an opportunity to hear them reflect at a moment when in some ways they're vulnerable because I've worn them down.
Yeah. And well, after 3 or 4 hours, I think when you say that not many people get to say their story and their journey, not many people get someone who wants to listen to them for
That's true.
3 or 4 hours. One other thing that I thought about is, have you thought about a show called How I Blew This?
Yeah. I'm asked that a lot. No, because nobody would listen to that show.
And it's not what you want.
It's not what I do. And my show is not success fetishization.
Yeah.
I focus on failure. But the people who come on the show were successful. And that actually is the carrot to bring you to the show, to listen to their failures. Because I want you to hear these people you admire and respect and know that, like you and me, there was a time in their life when nobody would take their call. Because I remember that. I remember that time in my life. I remember trying to convince people that I could do this, that I can actually do this. Just give me a chance. I remember that. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's key. That's crucial. So how I failed this, there are shows like that out there.
Not your gig.
It's not my gig.
Yeah. So, Guy, we've only spent 47 minutes together, not 4 hours. But of course, I have to ask you that question.
Yep.
What role do you feel that luck played in your success, or intelligence or skill or privilege? How did you get here? What was the ingredient for you?
Look, I am simply by the fact that I was born a white man in America, I had this unearned advantage, right? My mom and dad came to this country in the early 70s, and they made a life for themselves and their children, and that's something to be commended. When I came to NPR in the 90s, my parents didn't even know what it was. I didn't grow up listening to NPR. I didn't grow up in a family of intellectuals. I grew up in a family of working people who got jobs and wanted to make a living. I have had the advantage to become educated in a way that my parents didn't, because I had that choice, because I didn't start all over again in the United States. I had the great luck to go to a barbecue 20 years ago and see somebody there who wasn't supposed to be there, who I then met up 4 days later by chance, who is now my wife of 20 years, 15 years, who I've been with since, who is my most important, sort of intellectual outlet. I mean, she's the person I run every idea by. I wouldn't be doing how I built this if it wasn't for her, because my first stop is her, and to consult with her. She's a lawyer. She's so smart. So there is a lot of luck embedded in all of our experiences, and chance and opportunity. I think we all at some point will encounter luck or the opportunity to capture it. And the question is, are you ready for it? And I don't think I'd be here right now if I didn't go to that barbecue 20 years ago. So luck to me is a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, Guy, we're at the limit of our conversation. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with our guests here and record it for Just the Right Book. We've been talking with Guy Raz, the author of How I Built This, and, keep on inspiring everybody to do things they don't think they can do. We need more of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your support, and I hope you guys can pick up the book, and I hope
everybody buy the book.
I hope you get something out of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.